Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 38 from the Ecce textbook and dive into the grammar of it. So like we always do, the first thing we're going to do is look at some derivatives just so you can get a sense of the vocab, and connect it back to English. It's really important when you're reading these stories to make sure that you have that foundation where you can see sort of connections to English, if that's your first language, in the Latin. It just makes it a lot easier. So we'll start with that. Hopefully that'll help you out. With just kind of understanding English a bit better. And then we'll dive into the grammar for this chapter. And the grammar is something that is pretty familiar. You've probably seen a little bit of this before. I know we kind of talked about it back in chapter 15, but it's Latin numbers, right? And even though we've hit on it before, we're going to really dive in and explore how these numbers work and why you don't necessarily start your Latin career by learning numbers. It's a little bit trickier than, say, English or even the Romance languages. So to start, though, like I said, we're going to dive right into derivatives. So the first derivative you want to look at is the word mensis, which means month. And from this, we get menstruation, trimester, semester. They all have to do with something involving the month, right? And you can see it in the way that they're spelled. Next, we have discipulos, which means student, right? And this is where you get words like disciple and even discipline, right? Discipline might not be one that you've connected before, but it's from the exact same root. Next, we have annus, which means year. And from this, we get a bunch of words in English, like annuity, anniversary, annual, perennial, millennium. All of these have to do with the year or something involving the year, right? And you can see it, like I said, in the way that they're spelled and even the meanings, right? Millennium is 1,000 years. Annual means it happens every single year. Same with an anniversary, right? It's a yearly event. So that stem of year is in all these words in English. Next, we have ruina, right, which literally means ruin in Latin. And this is where you get ruin in English, ruination, ruinous. They're all conveying the same idea, and they all have basically the same spelling too. Next, we have the verb navigare, which means to sail. And again, there's a bunch of good words you get in English, but some basic ones are navigate, right? If you're sailing, you're navigating. Circumnavigate is a word you've probably seen. It's sailing, around. Literally, it means to sail around. It's people who circumnavigated the world, right? Magellan, I think, was one of them. That's where you get that term circumnavigate. You're literally sailing around. Navigable, navigation, navigator, right? This is all the same root, right, of sailing or kind of, in English, navigating. Same idea. They all come from the same place. Next, we have terra, which means the ground or the earth. And from this, we get words like terrain, even terracotta, which is a type of material you can build with. It just means like cooked earth, right? It's that baked clay. So it has the idea of terra, the earth in it. Terrarium, terrace, a terrier, those little dogs, they're called terriers because they're so low to the ground. They're all coming from this idea of earth or ground. Next, we have mare, which means sea. Right, and from this you get words like marine, marina, marinate, maritime, mariner. They all have to do with the sea, right? A mariner, for instance, is someone who sails on the sea, or a marina has to do with the ocean or the sea. So they all come from this same stem. Next, we have tempestas, which is a storm. And this is where you get, the word tempestuous in English, or a tempest, right? A tempest is another word for a storm. Next, we have naus, right, which is a boat, which is what you use for navigare, right, to sail. So from this word, it's related to navigare, but similar, slightly different, even though it's from the same root. You get navy, right? A navy is your all the boats you have in your military, basically. And naval, right? If you're talking about, a naval academy, for instance, is where you'd go to learn to be in the Navy. So again, it's related to the word navigare, very similar, but, these English words come from this. And next we have obsidere, which can mean to like besiege or sit down even. And in this chapter, it really is besieging, right? You'll see how it plays out. But from this, we get obsession or obsess. If you obsess over something, it means you like can't focus. You're really not besieging necessarily, but it is. You can kind of see how those two words are related to each other, right? You're really focusing on it is kind of the idea. Next, we have incendere, right, which gives us the word to burn, right, or to light on fire. And this is where you get incense, incendiary. If you call something incendiary, it means it's going to burn, right? And incense is when you're burning those particular, what are they, herbs, spices, I don't even know, to get that scent in the air, right? That's why it's called incense. It has to do with burning. And last, we have delere, which means literally in English to delete, right? But in our chapter, it really means to destroy something. So it's where you get delete. Deleterious is a great kind of vocab word in English, an SAT type word, or even deletion, right? They all have to do with destroying something. So those are the derivatives. And again, the more you practice them or read them, you're kind of building up your core English vocabulary, which is something that's really useful for taking Lat, right? It will help you with all of these English words. So it's just something to really hold on to. It's a good idea for sure. Next, we have the grammar, right? And so when we dive into the grammar here, we're going to be talking about Latin numbers, which is really important. And like I said, this is something that you probably hit on before, earlier on in chapter 15, Ecce covers it, but now we're really going to explore it in detail. So the question we want to start with is, my students ask me this all the time, Mr. C, why didn't we learn numbers in Latin 1? They always say their Spanish, their friends rather, who are taking Spanish, right? Their Spanish colleagues, you might think of it, their friends taking French. They always learn how to say 1, 2, 3, right, on day 1. How come we don't do that in Latin? It's a really good question, but there is a reason for it. And the reason is pretty simple. It's because some of these Latin numbers have case number and gender. So you can't dive into counting 1, 2, 3 unless you understand case number and gender, which takes a little bit, right? It takes an understanding of adjectives that you just don't have when you're starting out in Latin. But at some point, you do want to run into Latin numbers, and you've been seeing them for a while now. But we want to kind of unpack what's going on with them. Okay. And again, like I said, if you were to try to use numbers, from day 1, it's really not that easy in Latin, right? In English, it's pretty straightforward, even the Romance languages. But if you were to try to describe this picture and say, oh, there's 2 dogs here, you'd have to know the case number gender, right? Are the dogs masculine or feminine? I need a plural version of it. What's the case? Are they the subject, the direct object? That's why it's a little more complicated than what you've, necessarily seen in English. Latin's a little bit trickier. But you're going to be fine. So we're going to take it one piece at a time. We just want to think, where do we start, right? How do we start when we're diving into Latin numbers? Well, the first thing that you need to understand is there's 2 different types of numbers in English and in Latin, right? This is something that you may not have heard before, because if you're a native English speaker, you wouldn't necessarily think of this, right? You don't always think in terms of grammar. But we have what are called cardinal numbers and ordinal numbers. And we're going to unpack both of those as we go. So the first thing we want to think about are cardinal numbers, right? Cardinal numbers are the numbers we use for counting. They're really counting numbers. So in Latin, they're going to answer the question, quote, how many, right? So how many of these we have? Oh, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are counting numbers. And they look like this, okay? So here's the numbers 1 through 10 in Latin. And remember I said the first 3 are going to look a little different because they have case number gender. So 1 is uno sa 2 is duo duai duo, and 3 is tres tres tria. What you're seeing there is the gender, and we'll come back to that in a second, which is why they have 3 different endings happening. But the rest of them don't have gender. You have quatuor, 4, quinque, 5, sex, 6, septem, 7, octo, 8, novem, 9, and decem, 10. Right? Now, some of these at the end we've actually spoken about before, and they should look familiar. 7, 8, 9, and 10, this is where we get certain months, right, on our calendar. So September, October, November, and December. And we've said before it's because they added, right, into the Roman calendar, they added July and August, which are named after Julius Caesar and Augustus. But before that, you literally were naming the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th month, right, which is why you have the numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10 in these names. So it's just a fun little connection. Again, now September, October, November, December, they're not actually those numbers anymore. You have to add 2 because we snuck in July and August. But back in the day, that's all they were, right? So it might look a little familiar to you, all right? So what I was saying before, and it's an important thing to write down, this is why we don't really dive in right away, or at least it's another way to say it is this is why Ecce gave you the numbers 1, 2, and 3 back in chapter 15, because they're different, right? They have that case number and gender element, particularly gender. So there's not one set way to use the number 1. It depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about one boy, you might say unus. If you're talking about one girl, it would be una. And if you're talking about a building, it would be unum, right? It depends on the gender. And then even deeper than that, it really depends on the case, right? Is it the subject? Is it the direct object? What's going on here? So this is something you really want to put in your notes and pay attention to. The numbers 1, 2, 3, and very randomly 500 all have different gender involved with them, right? And you can see that in the endings. The 3 endings are representing masculine, feminine, and neuter. So you just want to take a note of that, make sure you understand it, and you don't get too confused as you go. Okay. And there's also a good connection here to pause and think about the Romance languages. So we're always saying, learning Latin will help you with the Romance languages. And I feel like sometimes we don't stress enough how it will actually do that. This is an example. And I just picked Spanish and French just because they tend to be more common. But you could have done this with Italian too, Portuguese. You would have ended up in the same place. But if you look at the Latin numbers on the left, right? So 1 through 10. Compare them to Spanish and French, and you can see the connection, right? The number 1, unus. In Spanish, uno, and in French, un, right? 1. You can see it with 2, with duo, dos, and deux. 3, tres, tres, and trois, right? And don't mind my accent on the French or the Spanish, but you can at least see the connection here, right? They're all very related to each other, and they're coming from this Latin stem. So this is a good example of how you can use Latin to help yourself learning the Romance languages, if you know the Latin numbers, you'll have absolutely no problem with the French, Spanish, Italian, whichever Romance language you choose to pursue next, you'll be fine. Okay, so it's just a good thing to have. The numbers are a pretty easy connection to make. So next we want to take the next 10 numbers, right? So 11 through 20. So for 11, we have undecim. And here we want to pause. You'll notice that in all these numbers, undecim, duodecim, tridecim, something's going on here, right? What you're really seeing is you have the word decim, which means 10, and then you're adding numbers to it. So 11 is undecim, right? Undecim just means 1 and 10. Then you have duodecim, tridecim, quattordecim, quindecim, sedecim, septendecim, and then we get to something slightly different. So 11 through 17, you are adding something, right? You're just adding a number to the number 10. So you take what you already know, for instance, the number 3, tre, right, in this case, or trace. You add it to decim, and you have 10 plus 3, 13. Okay. When you get to 18, 19, and 20, though, something different is happening. So you start with the number 20, wiginti. Then you have 18 is duo de wiginti, literally duo, 2 from 20. So 2 from 20 is 2 minus 20, which is 18, right? 19 is un de wiginti, 1 from 20. So for 18 and 19, you are counting backwards from the next kind of large number 20, and you get something slightly different. But here I'm color coding for you so you can see what I'm talking about. The decim part, right, is 10, or when you get to 18 and 19, it's wiginti, 20, right? In front of it, you have one of our cardinal numbers, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Or for 18 and 19, you have 2 and 1 again. So you're adding from 11 to 17 a number plus 10. For 18 and 19, you're subtracting. You literally have 2 from 20 and 1 from 20. So there's a sort of an addition and subtraction element happening here for how we deal with these numbers. And again, if we come back to Spanish and French, you can see this, right? You can see this in the way they're spelled. For French, in number 16, you don't really see this, but in Spanish you can. It's 10 plus 6, right? For French and Spanish, for 17, 18, and 19, you can see you're just adding numbers, right? So it's 10 plus something, right? In French, it's 17 means 10 plus 7. 18 is 10 plus 8. The one difference here is in Spanish and French, they're adding 10 plus a number. In Latin, you're doing subtraction, 20 minus something, right? 2 from 20, literally. And this is a good place to pause and understand that at some point, they were doing in Latin, 10 plus 8 and 10 plus 9. It just wasn't quite as popular. And so the one we see much more often is this subtraction element. But again, if you can understand the Latin, you're going to be totally fine with the Spanish and French. So it's always a good place to just pause for a minute and see the connection across the Romance languages. Okay, so back to the cardinal numbers. Once we get past this, you can do the same thing with any multiple of 10 you want. So here are the next multiples of 10 just to kind of let you see them. For 30, you have triginta, right? Then you have quadraginta, 40, quinquaginta, 50, sexaginta, 60, septuaginta, 70, octaginta, 80, nonaginta, 90. Then you have centum for 100. And again, centum is something we've seen a lot. Think century, right? 100. But even the other numbers, right? I believe if you call someone a Septuagint, right? Or a septuagenarian, right? It's related to this. It's someone in their 70s. So you've kind of got that element, even in English. You may not use them a lot, but there is a little element of these numbers left over even in English. But they're pretty straightforward. So again, you would just be adding to them, 31, you just add 1 to triginta and you're on the right track. And then you have the wild card here, 500, quinquaginti. And notice how it's got the plural endings, e-I-a, because it's obviously a plural number. This is another one that has gender, so you just want to mark down the 500. And for 1,000, you have mille, right, which is where we get 1,000 from. Think millennium is 1,000 years. Okay, so like we said, these are pretty straightforward, but the numbers 1, 2, and 3 and 500 are trickier because they have case number gender. So the trick, though, is just make sure that you match it. Whatever the case number and gender of your noun is that you're describing with either 1, 2, 3, or 500, you just match the same case number gender and you are all set. So don't let them throw you off. They're pretty straightforward. Okay, so for example, you might have this. If you said unam sororem Marcus habet, you're saying Marcus has one sister. Unam is feminine accusative singular. It's matching sororem, which is also feminine accusative singular. They have the same case number gender. If you want to change it up, you could say unum fratrem Cornelia habet, right? Cornelia has one brother. Unum now is matching fratrem, so they're both masculine accusative singular, right? So we went from unam, feminine, to unum, which is masculine. Okay. And the same thing would happen with the neuter noun. You could say tria aedificia Marcus vide, right? Marcus sees 3 buildings, tria aedificia. They're both neuter, accusative, plural. So again, the numbers 1, 2, and 3 and 500, right? Don't want to forget that one. But 1, 2, and 3 are really the more common ones you're going to see as you work through Latin. They just have to match in case, number, gender. That's the only thing. Okay. So for a quick recap of the cardinal numbers, they're counting numbers, right? They don't have case, number, and gender except for 1, 2, 3, and 500, right? These are going to use first and second declension adjective endings. They have a specific case, number, gender, right? So that's the only thing you want to keep track of. Otherwise, the numbers are the same no matter what you're describing. So if you want to say 7 dogs, 7 boys, 7 girls, 7 buildings, whatever, it's always going to be septem. That doesn't change, which makes them a little bit easier to understand. So hopefully this is making some sense. You're not overly confused, right? Once you get the hang of it, you're going to be fine. The trick, though, is there is another type of number, which you might not have seen before, called ordinal numbers, right? And this is where your head can start to spin a little bit. So let's just take a little at a time and make sure that we're feeling comfortable with it. Okay? An ordinal number, just like it sounds, is something that a number rather that tells the order of something. So if you said first, right? I'm first in line. That's different from saying I'm one. Right? It's a completely different idea. I'm ordering things. I'm saying I'm first, someone is second, someone else is third. These are called ordinal numbers. And they look a little different in Latin, right? Of course, because they're not doing the same thing as cardinal numbers. So if you were to say first, you have primos aum. Second is secundus aum. Third is tertius aum. Then we have quartus aum, quintus aum, sextus aum, septimus aum, octavus aum, nonus aum, and decimus aum. So right off the bat, something should catch your attention here, something that's different. And the thing that's different is they're all using first and second declension adjective endings, right? Those us, endings. So this is a difference from cardinal numbers, where most of them don't have endings. These all do. Ordinals are going to be used, you're going to have different genders, basically, depending on what you're describing. So this definitely makes them a little different and maybe a little trickier, but you can still figure it out. Don't be freaked out by this. It just has adjective endings, so you're going to end up matching case, number, and gender. If we keep going, the next step, 11th, you have undecimus, then duodecimus, and tertius decimus, right? And it keeps going from here, but you can notice what's happening. We're back to adding things, right? So they're all starting with decimus, right? 11th through 17th have decimus at the end, which means 10th. And we're adding in front of it, just like we did with cardinal numbers. So 11th is literally 1 and 10th, right? 1 plus 10th is 11th. Duodecimus is the number 2 going with 10th, which is where you get 12th, right? Tertius is the number 3, so 3 plus 10th is one way to think of it, is how you get 13th. Then quartus, right, with decimus is 4 plus 10. So you can see the pattern here. We're adding as we go. And just like with cardinal numbers, when you get to 18, 19, and 20, we're doing something different. So 20 is vicesimus, right, which means 20th. To get 18th and 19th, just like with cardinal numbers, we're going to subtract. So duodecisimus literally means 2 from 20th, which gives you 18th. And 19th is undecisimus, 1 from 20th. Right? So you can see it's following a similar pattern as cardinal numbers. These, though, are all telling you the order of things, which just makes them a little different. It takes a little getting used to, but you're going to be fine the more you practice with these. And the last set we want to get is the numbers 50th, right? Quinquagesimus, 100th, which is centesimus, 500th, which is quingentesimus, right? And 1000th, which is millesimus. Okay, so they're all doing the same thing. They all have, gender, right? Masculine, feminine, and neuter forms, and you're just using first and second declension adjective endings with them. So now we can take a pause and do a quick comparison, right? Cardinal numbers versus ordinal. What is the difference? Well, cardinal numbers are used for counting, right? Ordinal numbers are used for listing the order of things. So it's the difference between cardinal numbers, 1, 2, 3, and ordinal numbers, first, second, third. For cardinal numbers, most of them do not have case, number, gender, right? Except for 1, 2, 3, and 500. For ordinal numbers, they all use that usa ending. So you're going to treat them as first and second declension adjectives. Cardinal numbers are answering the question, how many, right? How many dogs do you see in the picture? I see 5, right? That would be a counting number. You're counting the number of dogs. Ordinal numbers are answering the question, what? You might say something like, what hour is it? Oh, it's the 10th hour. It's the 8th hour, right? It's a different question that you're answering, right? So it's used in a different way. So you just want to make sure before you do anything with this that you understand the difference between a cardinal number and an ordinal number. And if we were to put them all into one giant chart, you might need to pause the video, try to zoom in, whatever you can do. These are all the numbers. So in this chart, I listed them next to each other so you can see the cardinal and the ordinal equivalents. So like, for instance, the number 1, una sa right? Cardinal number means 1. For the ordinal, you have primo sa first. So this will let you kind of match them up and see what's going on, right? And hopefully this makes some sense to you and you can kind of see the connection. Cardinal and ordinals are related to each other. They might not always look perfectly similar, but they are related to each other. So this is what you want to have a little practice on. But honestly, the more you read and get these in context, do some sentences and translation, the more you're going to be fine with these, right? You get used to it after a while. You don't necessarily need to go memorizing this chart. You can if you need to for class, but otherwise it's much better to just read and get them in context than to try to memorize, a million different versions of the chart. Let's just do some examples just so you can see a few in context, right? So here we have puellae septem horas dormiveram. So you're saying the girls, right? They dormiveram, they slept for 7 hours. It's the accusative of duration, right? Horas is accusative, so septem is going with it. It doesn't need to match in case number gender because 7 is not one of the cardinal numbers that has case number gender. It's just septem, right? You describe 7 with anything and it's always going to be spelled septem, right? You don't have to worry about that. So this is a good example of every number basically cardinal except for 1, 2, 3, and 500 would do something like this. Just stick it with the noun it's going with and you're going to be totally fine. The trick here is in context. You got to make sure you understand kind of what's going on because technically you could have been saying 7 girls slept. It wouldn't quite work in terms of how long they slept for, but you can see the idea. If septem were describing horas or puellae, it wouldn't really matter. It would be spelled the same way. Okay. Here we have quota hora est tertia hora. Right? So quota hora est, what hour is it? It's the tertia hora, the 3rd hour. Now here we are matching case number gender because we have an ordinal number, right? It's not 3, it's 3rd, right? I'm giving the order of something. It's the 3rd hour that comes from the day, right? Beginning of the day. So tertia is matching hora, which is why they both have that A ending, right? It's a feminine noun, hora. And it's singular and nominative here. So they're matching each other. That's why you have tertia hora. If I were to say 3rd something else, 3rd building, for instance, it would be tertium, right? You'd have to change your ending to match the noun, okay? And here, one more example, we have unum fratrem Cornelia habet. This is the example I gave you back at the beginning of the video. You're saying Cornelia has 1 brother. Again, 1 is one of the cardinal numbers that actually does match case number gender. So you have to say unum fratrem, 1 brother, masculine, as opposed to unam sororem, which would be 1 sister, right? You'd have to change the spelling because the number 1 will match whatever it's going with. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. Like I said, the best thing you can possibly do in dealing with numbers is read through it. Try to memorize as many as you can, but just read. The more you read, the more you get this in context, the better you're going to be. Another pro tip for you, again, our buddy High Paws has a video on this. Go for it. The craziness of these videos kind of helps you understand what's going on. Maybe it'll help you memorize them. So if you're looking for a video, feel free. Watch his song. It'll stick in your brain forever. But the real thing you want to do is practice, and this is where something like Magistrula comes into play. So if you get enough practice problems on Magistrula, you'll start to see these numbers working in. Right? And the more you can see them in context, the better you're going to be. But even if you can't do Magistrula, just read as much as you can possibly read. It's the best way to let all this sink in. And by seeing numbers in context, right, in sentences, you'll start to catch on how they work, which ones need to match case number and gender, which ones don't. It'll just make it so much easier for you to memorize. Okay? So here's a quick recap just to end the video. We said there are 2 types of Latin numbers. You have cardinal and ordinal. The cardinal numbers are for counting. So numbers like 1, 2, 3. The ordinal numbers are for literally telling the order of something. 1st, 2nd, 3rd would be the examples. Okay. Cardinal numbers, except for 1, 2, 3, and 500, don't have that gender element, right? There's no case number gender matching. Ordinal numbers do have case number gender, right? They have different gender. So this is why you see ordinal numbers with the us, a, endings, right? They have to match whatever noun they're going with. Okay. So keep these straight. Like I said, practice as much as you can. If you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll help you however I can. But otherwise, read as much as you can, do as much practice as you can, and these numbers will be fine, right? You'll figure it out pretty quickly and you should be okay. Good luck.